Hello and welcome to the MAKEthrough.studio Podcast. My name is Danny Champion and I'm your host on today's show. What we like to do here is invite disruptive, bespoke creators of any kind to come on and talk about 5 major sources of inspiration in their lives. On this show we have a beautiful soul, a writer, creator, extraordinaire. I always say in the beginning of the episode, when we get into the episode, it's like, mystery guest, can you introduce yourself? But by the time we get there, usually, you know who the person is. But I think I might leave it a mystery in this. Let's leave it a mystery. It's mysterious. That's interesting. All right, I'll leave that in. In the meantime, you can go to MAKEthrough.studio, click on contact. You can sign up to be an early adopter of our app, the MAKEthrough app. You can get it for Apple devices right now. It's available in the App Store, so go and get that. Build yourself a profile, build yourself a project, and then go ahead and find like-minded individuals just like you to chase your dreams and build your dream project, whatever it may be. If you're working on an album, writing a book, or you're working on a play, or you're into glass blowing or pottery, and you need to find your tribe, you need some collaborators. You go onto the MAKEthrough app, you find those people, you connect with them, you talk to them, you make things, and your life is better because of it. So go and do that now. You can do that right now as listening to my voice in your ears, in your headphones, in your living room, on your device, in your car, in the bath. You can go and do that now if you want. So I'll leave that with you, just as and when. All right, cheers. So let's get into this episode. Let's let the guests introduce themselves for once, and we'll see how that goes. All right, let's get into it. Case, let's get started. We are recording. It has begun. I'm here with a very special guest. So without further ado, mystery guest, would you please just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what you love.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Sophie and I am a writer by morning and evening, and by day I'm a personal assistant. And what do I love? Creating anything. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so if it doesn't come out on paper, then I don't create that. It's only stuff that I like.
Very cool. Okay. And how does that manifest? Like, you say you're a writer. So what kind of things are you interested in writing? What's the dream job? What's the ultimate goal? Where are you headed with this?
Oh my God, I'd love to be a staff writer. I had an experience when I was writing my book. I was in LA and I went to a coffee shop, Starbucks, funnily enough, which is one of my favorite haunts. Every writer likes Starbucks just because you can sit there for hours. Anyway, I went and sat in a little corner and I got my laptop out and I was just sitting there and I was watching these 2 guys on the next table, and one of them would furiously write for about 5 minutes and then stop and then pass the laptop to the other guy who would read it and then furiously type away, and then they would go back and forth, and they were like that for an hour, and I got no writing down because I was watching this, and I really deeply regret not asking them what they were doing, but obviously they were staff writers on a show, and I just thought it was so cool. And I've spoken to people who have been in writers' rooms and they've said if you pick a good one, if you find a good one, then they are just the most enormous amount of creativity, talent, fun, and that's what I'd love. So that's my ultimate goal. And obviously see my screenplays that I'm writing on the big screen. That's obviously. Oh, and I'd love to be a director as well.
Oh, wow. Well, a few things there. A couple of things to aim for, I suppose. And I'm sure we'll get into the book and the screenplay and your movie directing ambitions. Something you said there, though, you're sort of watching these 2 guys write and share a laptop and share ideas. One's writing, one's not. And just observing that process and being quite envious of it, I assume. What stopped you just approaching those 2 guys and having some kind of interaction? Because that slight hesitation to do that, had I been in that situation myself, is really familiar to me, actually. So what stopped you?
I think at that time, I didn't really think I was a writer at all. I was sort of dabbling in this creative process that I called writing. So it was a lack of confidence, but also I've always been sort of brought up to appreciate people's personal space, just observe and be an observer rather than sort of interfere and put myself in there. I mean, that was back in 2019. So now, yes, of course, I would go up and say, hey, what are you doing? It looks so exciting. But of course, everybody else's jobs is always exciting, whereas our jobs are always mundane and boring. So they probably thought very differently. But it's a great question. It was just really that.
Got it. And something else you said there as well, observe and be an observer. That sounds like a vital component in any form of narrative-driven creativity, do you think?
It is. And it's something that I naturally do with people and situations. I always set it from a standoff point, just looking at it. And then you can see the big picture and then use your intuition as to whether it's something that you want to use at all or throw away. So any writer puts things away, compartmentalize it in their head like an index card to pull it out later.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm sure we'll get into some of this in a bit more depth, but as I think, what we like to do here is invite creative souls onto the show, anyone with a disruptive spark of creativity in their spirit. We invite those creative people to come on and talk about 5 major sources of inspiration in their lives. You've given me your list ahead of time, and we'll move through this list and we'll see what it means to you and how exactly you've been inspired by some of these things. So if it's okay, I'll move into point number 1 on your list, which is potentially a little bit sensitive, but I've got here, as you've written it, my father's death. And when I was 5 years old, I developed a crazy inner life, which is my imagination and creativity. So please, let's get into that. Flesh that out for us. What does that mean to you?
I guess when it was a surprising death, it wasn't like we knew it was coming. One minute he was there, one minute he wasn't. So obviously, you can imagine as a 5-year-old, my life completely turned upside down. Well, whatever age you are, death causes your life to be turned upside down. But as a 5-year-old, the only way I found to cope with it is to really develop my inner world and my inner fantasy and use that as creatively as I could through my drawing. Or I actually used to love trying to put on plays with my brother. My poor suffering younger brother he wasn't really a muse, but he was certainly a puppet. I was a director. I don't think we ever performed anything perfectly because I think he would run off crying because I was too hard on him. But I used to just sit for hours going into my inner world and coping with the outer world and the outer pain that was happening. And my inner fantasy and my inner world was just calm and where I wanted to go. So that really helped me develop my creativity. But then, unfortunately, when I was at school, it was kind of crushed by a teacher. So it scuppered for many, many years, my creativity, until very recently. So it's amazing how quickly it can take away from you. What I say my creativity is the output, I guess. I've always been seen as moody, as people used to call me, but that was only me withdrawing into myself. If something felt unsafe or vulnerable, I would just go into myself and it was all calm again. So that's kind of what I mean by, the creativity being stamped out.
For sure. Do you feel as though turning that moment into gold, do you feel like the way that you have that perspective now where it's a source of inspiration for you, has your understanding of that, is that still happening, do you think? I'm sure it didn't feel like an inspirational moment when it happened. Certainly at 5, you probably didn't understand what was happening entirely. So I just think there's something really special there about how you've managed to turn that around and understand it in a way that's really useful. Is there anything interesting to you about that?
Thanks. And yes, it is. When I look back on it, it is pretty special. And I think, as you say, I didn't understand it at the time. Now I do. And now I use it consciously, whereas back then it was kind of more unconsciously. It was just something I naturally did. Whereas now, although it's natural, it is more conscious. If I'm feeling vulnerable or if I'm feeling something, I will consciously go into myself and go into that creativity side. Sort of using a father's death, I guess, as inspiration. It sounds really quite a bit dodgy. Well, not dodgy, but it just doesn't sound right for a 5-year-old. But that's the only way really I could use his death positively, because of course there were negative sides to it as well, and how it impacted me in my life and my family. But if we talk about inspiration, then it's the positive. Well, no, I guess the negative side is inspiration too, I guess, as well.
Oh, interesting. How so?
They say about turning pain into power. So if you go through traumatic experiences and use it in what you want to do and what you're here on this earth to do, use it positively rather than negatively. So I guess that's how...
For sure. Understood. Can I ask you very quickly about your father? What, in your memory of him? Like, can you describe him a little bit? Just describe his character a little bit?
Sure, yes. I was a real daddy's girl. And funnily enough, he was very, very creative as well. He was an artist, and I have some half-finished artwork of his actually. But he was very romantic, very creative, and my mum was very strong, and dad was the more gentler side. But dad was a pilot, and so he was away a lot. So I guess that romanticized my thought of him. And of course, before 5, you don't have many memories. I do have 2 memories of him, which are lovely. And one involves a chocolate cake cake. And now, of course, I love chocolate cake. But he was a gentle soul, very gentle, very personable, quite shy. And sadly, his job caused his death. He died in a plane crash. But he loved it. He loved his piloting. It was his all to him. So he died what he was loved doing.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. You mentioned there some half-finished artwork, which is, I mean, that is such a special artifact to have and keep in memory of him, especially the fact that it's unfinished. I think that's so beautiful. That really jumped out to me as being something very special indeed. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. And something else you mentioned as well, which I found interesting, was that you mentioned that a teacher somehow managed to crush your inspiration that you found in this. So I was curious to understand a bit more about what happened there and how you compartmentalized that and categorized that and how you see it now.
Yeah. So going back to my dad and his artwork, yes, thank you. I mean, it is a beautiful thing to have that. And one is, funnily enough, his drawing of the house at our childhood home that we grew up in. So that was pretty special. And the other was actually an aeroplane as well. So both of them are very poignant, but it just showed his gentle side with what he was creating. And I also do have some bits and pieces he sent to my mum as well. He would make cards for her and things like that. And I have some of those as well. So I've got the finished and non-finished bits and pieces. So I'm very lucky to have been able to keep things like that and that my mum kept it, because often we throw things away, sadly. My mum was a bit of a hoarder, so I was quite fortunate. And then moving to the teacher. Yeah, I was 15 and I loved writing, and she would basically tell me that my writing was absolutely terrible and that I would never amount to anything. I would never be a writer. And she actually, when I did my GCSE, this was English literature, I did my GCSE, and she called up the board afterwards and asked them to remark my paper because I shouldn't have got the grade so high as I did. She had no faith in me. So the board actually told her, no, Sophie deserves that grade. She did very well, and maybe have a little more faith in your students. And that's the kind of teacher that taught me, ironically, writing and all about literature. But luckily, for a long time, it affected me until recently. And now, if I was to tell anybody who has a teacher like that, then it's more about them than it is about me. It always was, you know.
Absolutely. Do you know what? I actually had a similar experience. My art teacher, she tried to reduce the grade that I achieved. This was at A level in art and graphics. She managed to do it. She was successful, and she was very pleased with herself that she'd managed to do that to me. And I was pretty upset about that at the time. But my understanding of that and my acceptance of that has obviously changed and evolved over the years. And my perspective has altered. Do you think your father would have reacted to that or helped you through it? Do you think he would have had a useful perspective?
Oh, I think so. And I'm sorry that you've been through that. And I think so many children have had teachers that have crushed their dreams. And it is all about really standing in your own true power and realizing that their voice doesn't matter, their opinion doesn't matter. But well done for you for not allowing that to destroy your creativity or your creative life. It's very admirable that you've managed to do that. But my dad would have just said, stand in your own power and be true to who you are. Always be authentic. And just because somebody's mean doesn't mean that we have to be mean back. Just allow her to be who she is, and just know that I have talent, I have creativity, I have enormous amounts to give, not just my immediate people in my life, but also a wider audience, which is who I reach with my book and my scripts and things like that.
For sure. I can't wait to hear about that stuff. Just before we move on to the next point on your list, you mentioned there that you managed your brother. I've got my note that I made was puppet brother and that you were writing plays. Can I just have a bit more on that? What was that about, and what's your relationship like with him?
Oh my goodness, a poor soul. I mean, I made him talk gibberish language. I just made him do stuff that he didn't really want to do. I mean, he wanted to go and play with his Legos or his cars, but I was making him stand over there or go and stand on a cushion or get that chair for me and to be able to introduce my play to the 2-3 people audience. And I think, I mean, he was a good soul. He still is. And any resentment has dissipated, which is quite nice. We've got a good relationship. He's one of 3 brothers that I have, but he was always, because he was a baby when dad died, I sort of took to mothering him. And I think that was worse for him, me mothering him rather than me directing him and being dictatorial in that moment. But he was a good sort, and I do thank him for being patient with me.
Oh, very sweet. understood. Okay, is there anything else that you feel you'd like to explore a little bit further before we move on? Is there anything else you'd like to share about your father?
I guess he'll pop in again in the conversation. Although he was absent, he's always been a huge part of my life because I have experienced so much death in my life. I have a very rich spiritual side to myself. And I know he's always around me, not necessarily physically, but certainly in spirit. And he always has been throughout my life. And I think maybe when I am creating, I feel him more with me than when I'm not. So that's quite special.
Understood. Thank you for all of that. So very interesting and inspiring, and actually a really nice segue into your second point on the list. I've got here, reading your notes. My mum is a huge inspiration. She not only inspired me to be who I am, but she gave me a gift which came in the shape of a box full of diaries and memorabilia and her stories of her adventures, which I've used to write my book and screenplay. So please, let's get into that. What exactly did she leave you, and what's the story there?
Funny, when you're a teenager and your mum or parent gives you anything whatsoever, you kind of throw it on a pile with everything else. But she gave me this box. As I mentioned, she's a hoarder, but she came from a lineage of hoarders. Her mum was a hoarder as well, but great for me because I had all this stuff. So what happened was when she was 19, she went to Canada to go and work over there back in 1958. But she met two intrepid travelers and they decided after the summer where they were working, they would backpack and hitchhike from Canada down to Mexico. And what she did was she kept so much memorabilia. She kept napkins of places she would go, ticket stubs of everything she did, and she also diarized her whole adventures as well. So I had a book waiting for me to write. Little did I know I was ever going to write it back in 17 when she actually gave it to me, but I kept it. And it was when I started talking to her, telling her story a little bit more, people said, oh, you should write her book. And then eventually the universe nudged me so much that I thought, okay, well, I'll go and do that. So that was the gift that she gave me. And little did I know that actually the gift was my destiny, because obviously I've used it to write a book and then turn it into a screenplay. My mum, looking at her strength and her resilience of losing a husband and the father of her children, 4 children, when she was mid-30s, and watching her grow up and how she dealt with that, because back then, of course, she didn't have the same support as somebody would now. And it was just pretty incredible. She was an incredible person. And I really was so inspired by her strength and her resilience, and also not letting her being on her own ever stop her from doing anything. She traveled enormously on her own. She would go with either groups or friends or on her own to places. And so I've got the strength, I guess, to do that myself, because it's not easy traveling on your own sometimes. And just her take on life as well, about not letting fear hold you back. And if you have an inner adventurer, go for it. You wear it on your sleeve and let that lead you, and have enormous amounts of experiences, adventures, and everything in between. And so that's what I've done. And that's the huge inspiration. Sadly, she passed away 15 years ago, so I no longer have her either. But again, she's around me the whole time. I talk about all the signs. She sends me signs all the time, and I talk about that in the book.
Goodness me, I'm so sorry to hear that. And you've touched on a few things there that I'd like to explore a bit further if possible. Just as a concept, that item, that gift she gave, what a beautiful starting point for a story.
Thank
and
you.
What a way to help you. That's truly a really obvious and inspiring gift, and so clear of, how powerful such a thing would be. Is there a bit more detail? Like, so you say you received that thing when you were 17. Was it a big box? Was it all sort of collected in a pile? Was it documented, or, was it listed, or was it ordered? Was it not? Just sort of logistically, like, what was that thing that you received?
It was a big box with hundreds of loose photographs, but also actual scrapbooks glued in with her stuff as well. And the diaries were all handwritten. They actually, funnily enough, her and one of the other travelers, they wanted to write a book, and I think they wrote about half a page and then realized their typing skills were non-existent and then gave up. But a lot of it was an organized mess. That's what it was. And luckily for me, it's all in chronological order as well. So she also kept sort of even pre her travels, so her actual journey out there, because at the time she couldn't afford to fly, so she got a boat for 2 weeks out there. And so she's got the ticket and also the documentation of all of that, and her going away card cards that everybody saved, and she put that in the scrapbooks. So it really did document from very first to the very last. So I was really lucky to have it. But as I say, at the time, I was just, you listen to your parents' stories and you think they're amazing, but you don't realize what big impact they actually have on you until something, I guess, happens. And when she died, her motto of life is never live with what if, never not do anything because of fear. And I think that that is where her stories came even more alive to me when I went back over them and really appreciated. Because, of course, as a 17-year-old girl, you never appreciate anything your parents say, especially. And it's only now as an adult and more mature that I think what she gave me and what she said, because, of course, she would regale stories. And we actually managed to go traveling together a lot. And we were in San Francisco. And when we were there, she told me about her adventures back then. And then, of course, I can read about them in the diaries and see all the memorabilia she kept. And also when we went to the Grand Canyon, we were sitting there and she was telling all these people on our table all about her adventures. And little did I know I would then be back in exactly the same place, writing about my travel experience, writing about her travel experience, then in between writing about our travel experience.
Okay, cool. Are you saying you were sitting somewhere around San Francisco, the Grand Canyon, long after your beautiful mother had passed, writing a story about the adventures that she'd had? Can you just explain that a little bit further?
Sure, yes. So, as I say about the universe nudging me to write the book, I decided to wrap up my life and go to the US and try and recreate the story and write I first of all thought I was going to sit in a beautiful apartment up in the Hollywood Hills by a swimming pool and write my memoirs and her memoirs as well. But that didn't quite work. The universe nudged me to actually travel and give substance to the book a little bit more. So I went to, yes, all the places that she went to, well, most of them, because I was on a very strict budget and I didn't have people to hitchhike. I had to obviously get my own way around. It's much more expensive now than it was back then. So I took off and I was writing my memoirs of traveling to all these places and then, of course, interspersing her diaries of her in the same places just 60 years before. So yeah, it was quite an adventure.
Unbelievable moment. And the idea of a scrapbook as well, and how she'd collected all of those items, and the fact that she had touched them physically and, like you're saying, made notes and used glue, and it was physical and it was probably falling to bits because of love, and she's given you this thing, and now you're sort of not only loaded with a physical gift and a source of memory, but she's also uploaded an ability in you to be creative and to shape your life in a really meaningful way. So as a gift, just to attempt to understand that and receive that from you, how significant it was. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss or explore in and around your mother and how important she was before we move on?
I mean, my mum was my hero. She really was. But we didn't always have a good relationship. When I was growing up, I think a lot of it was around a lot of pain that went on. And we were all sort of navigating our own grief. And I asked to go off to boarding school. So I went off to boarding school and that kind of saved me because I got away from the grief and the crap that was going on back home. And that developed me as a person, I think. And I really appreciate the fact that she allowed me to do that and agreed for me to do that. I think that sort of strengthened me as a person, that I could come back and say, listen, I think I want to change our relationship. I want you to be more of a mother. My father died. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't anybody's fault. It was just a random sad thing that happened. So let's move forward and have a relationship out of love and kindness rather than guilt and pain. And then after that, we were just best friends and had a proper, true mother-daughter relationship that I am so incredibly proud of her being my mother and the businesswoman she was, the person she was. And what I think I was so very lucky to do as well is to actually get to know my mum as a person, because I think we know our parents as parents, but we don't necessarily know them as people, and how she was when she was 19, her thoughts, her actions, and I have it all on paper, so she couldn't escape anything. But it was a true gift. It really was. And she's allowed me also to leave a legacy in the book.
So impressive and admirable that you were able to bring that to your mother in a really useful, empowering way that allowed you guys to evolve and grow and become and heal. Incredibly envious that you've had that relationship in your life. It sounds like you really deserve it. So that's a really heartwarming point on your rather wonderful list. So thank you for that. And if we can just move on to the third point on your list, I've got here, as written. I'm going to interrupt here, and this is normally where we'd have our sponsored segment, but we don't have a sponsor this week, so I'm going to advertise the MAKEthrough app, like I said at the top of the show, which is available to download for Apple devices in the Apple App Store right now. I'm working on an Android version, so that'll be coming soon, but right now you can get the MAKEthrough app on Apple devices from the App Store right now as we speak. You go on there, you build yourself a profile with some imagery, a bio and a description, and then you can build yourself a project, an album, a book, a brochure, a comic, a business idea, you know, a song, a play, a movie. If you're a director and you need actors, if you're a writer and you need illustrators, you go onto the MAKEthrough app, you find those people, you connect, you collaborate, you chat, you work together. It's the greatest app that's ever been made, in my opinion, maybe. And it's available right now for Apple devices, so go and get that. But I mean, that's enough of that. I mean, a little bit of a little soft sell, a little bit of a trail of breadcrumbs to a thing. I think that's fine, reasonable, tasteful. All right. So again, I'll leave it up to you. It's totally up to you. Download it, use it, you know, or don't. I mean, you know, it's your decision. It's your choice. You do what you want. You know what I mean? Just do what you want. Do what you want. All right? But make sure you do it. All right, let's get back to the episode. Thanks very much. Every time the shit hits the fan, I find inspiration in starting over and listening to people's stories, especially rags to riches. So tell me about that. What does that mean to you, and how can we explain that and illustrate that a bit further?
As I mentioned earlier about taking the pain and turning it into power and just using what we go through as people. We don't have linear lives. We don't want linear lives at all. We do go up and down, up and down. And it's finding the inspiration and the hope and all the positivity in those dark moments and using that to inspire you to move forward, to do what you love, what lights you up. But we all go through breakups, we change jobs, we may move, people die around us. So we all find the times when the shit hits the fan. And as I say, that's when we really need to learn more about ourselves. I'm a great believer in self-awareness, and I think self-awareness helps us change. And I don't think we're supposed to obviously be the same people the whole way through our life. And if we can move and change and become better, then I think we have more enriched lives. So that's kind of what I mean about finding inspiration when the shit hits the fan. And I think every time it does, and every time we have endings, the new beginnings are all about blank pages. And we can decide and have choices whether we use that and have a positive chapter, next chapter, or we can stay stagnant and be victims of life, which I get. We can be victims for a day or two and eat ice cream, but I think beyond that, we have to live life.
Totally agree. And this thing in you where you're able to turn these, when the shit hits the fan, turn those moments into emotional gold. Do you have to fight for that? Is that something that's naturally and organically happening in you, or is that something you're having to consciously go after?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. I think I'm very lucky in the fact that I am always trying to improve my life. And so I find inspiration, or when I said about listening to other people's inspirational stories, I am such a sucker for a really good sort of self-development story from other people, and know that if they can do it, I can do it, and to find out different ways of doing things. Because one way, if the shit hits the fan, it doesn't necessarily mean our tools that we've used in the past is going to work again. So we have to develop those as well. With everything that's gone on, I think Dad's death, different things that happened when I was a child, and also watching my mum be so resilient, almost having to start over completely with what she went through. There must be an innate organic part of me that also has that as well. So I think it is a bit of both, but I think we can train ourselves in order to find more positive stuff rather than the negative. Well, I'm not a dweller. I'm an action taker.
Okay, got it. And you also mentioned something there that life is non-linear, which resonated with me. And I just wonder if that understanding has found its way into your storytelling at all.
I think so, yes. I mean, certainly in the book, I talk a lot about what I'm going through at the time and how it affects me, because actually I have a meltdown halfway through and I don't realize, I don't put two and two together until it actually happens. So it's kind of like you're reading a real life meltdown. After I sort of realize what's going on, I I then pull my big girl pants on and say, right, okay, let's move forward. And there were times when I really wanted to give up as well, because I was really on a budget. There were times when I couldn't enjoy myself. I was going from one shithole to another as well, which didn't help. But it was finally those magical moments in those dark times that really got me through. And the meltdown was all about the fact that I was getting ill, but also I didn't realize that it was actually the anniversary of Mum's death happening at that time as well. So it's kind of just stopping and looking at the big picture, what's going on, and not being so tunnel visioned and trying not to stay in that stuckness. I mean, I know that there are people out there who say never get married to the outcome, always get married to the journey. Enjoy the journey, because that's where the magic is. And also once we get to the end, it can be a little bit sort of, as I hope that this is not a PG podcast, and I love the term of it. Goodness, like I said, you know, often when we get there, it's like not what we thought. It was a bit of a letdown. So it is also celebrating those small wins rather than always thinking about the big wins. So it's kind of all that encompassed.
Got it. Okay. I can ask you as well, feel free to say no, but I'm curious what you mean by meltdown. If you can help me understand what you mean by that and what happened there and how you feel about it.
Oh my God. Well, I just couldn't stop crying. And I'm not a real crier, and I couldn't understand it. I mean, literally sitting in another Starbucks, just tears going down, writing away, and just feeling like absolute crap. I really did. And I just thought, what am I doing? I didn't understand why I was writing this. You know, maybe I should just finish where I was, go back home, get some more money together and go back out again. As I say, Mum was always with me. I could always feel her. And she somehow told me, listen, you know, would you regret giving up right now if you look back in 5 years' time? And I was just like, well, of course, hell yes. She said, well, then keep going. And so I did. I was also very lucky. My editor, she was my mentor along the way as well. So I could speak to her and say, help, I'm being sort of mentally challenged and emotionally challenged and physically challenged at the moment. And we managed to talk a lot through. So I was just so lucky for her as well. So I wasn't completely on my own. But the meltdown was, as I say, it was just physically, emotionally, mentally, just absolutely exhausted. And I sort of stopped temporarily for a few hours and just allowed it to happen, because the more I fought it, that was where it was becoming more exhausting.
That feels important. Allowing it, right? Just accepting it, letting it in for a moment. I feel like I've observed versions of that in various different ways. And I'm curious to know from you how you feel about the possibility of a recovery from that. I would guess that your perspective is some way, somehow turning that into some kind of tool or a way to make progress in a really significant way. Can you just talk to me about the recovery and how you might potentially give advice to anyone who has had a similar feeling or moment in their own life?
I mean, I think we all have either potential to melt down or we do actually melt down. And I think it's in those moments not to lose yourself and what you have actually succeeded in or done in your life. I'm sure it's a lot more than in that moment how we feel. I remember being told by somebody, and I know it's out there by a lot of sort of gurus, that emotions are literally, number one, it's energy, and number two is that they're temporary. I mean, we can feel one emotion, we can jump from many emotions in a day. And although when you're feeling that down, it can be so encompassing and it can feel like you're never going to get out of the mud, but there's always that little light. And as long as you've got that little light, you can always have hope that it's going to move and it's going to change. When I tend to have a realization of what's going on or a reason behind how I'm feeling, that then gives me the strength to move on. I guess for me, it's knowing that it's more because it's situational rather than it's something I've actually done or something's being done to me. I read a book recently by Lynn Twist, and she said she's a possibilist. I think that's how you pronounce it. And I absolutely love this term because I think it's amazing. Because obviously when we talk about positivity, there can be toxic positivity. We can't always be smile, sunshine and light. That's just not life. There are times where we want to throw things out the window. We want to punch people. Obviously I don't condone that at all, and I don't myself. But sometimes it's good to grab a tennis racket and beat the shit out of your duvet, scream and things like that. And it's okay okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel fear. It's okay to feel every emotion we do. But things are always going to go wrong as well. And what I like about what she explains this to be is that in that moment, it's accepting what's going on, that things aren't 100% or the shit has hit the fan, but finding the solution out of it in that moment. And that's what the possibilist is, not smiling your way through it, because it doesn't always happen that way. So I just love that term. And I think being a PA, as I am, I do look for solutions, even in the dark moments.
Got it. So very clear and useful. And a lovely way to connect us to your next point on the list, actually, if I may. I've got here: my spirituality inspires me to use my creativity positively and also share it with others. I mean, I think you might have covered some of that, but is there anything we can elaborate on? You mentioned here that you're working on a mockumentary and your inspiration has come from your experience of being a PA. So if you could just build on that, like, what's that piece of work? What does it mean? And what else can I know about it, please?
Yes, I really do get inspiration from everything around me. I do actually have an insatiable appetite for new experiences. But even if I'm not having a new experience, what I'm experiencing in the day or in the week or in the month, I tend to try and use that as inspiration. And one thing about being a PA, especially in the private sector, is it's such an enigma to people. They just don't understand what goes on behind closed doors at these billionaires and ultra high net worth individuals, what they actually do. And yes, sometimes it is very much like Downton Abbey, with the expectation of the staff. But I also have seen a darker side to it as well. It can be really challenging at times with a lack of support, almost, because if something's not going their way and they're having an absolute hissy fit, then I'm the one who's in the firing line, but I don't have anywhere to go, because often, because we have to be very discreet and confidential, I can't offload it to anybody in my life. So often I have to keep a lot inside, but I do actually journal as well. But one thing that I thought was great would be to I would love to use the word revenge, but I don't like the word revenge, especially one of my past bosses that was pretty horrible. I've had a couple of those actually. I thought, what is the best thing to do? And it is to use it in my writing. So I wanted to use it in a mockumentary. So it is going to be set in a certain place, but it's going to be the characters that I've met throughout my life as a PA. And I use humor a lot. Humor is also my best friend, and I love comedy. Comedy and humor is kind of almost like a creation in itself. And I think it's very special for people to be really good at humor. So I wanted to approach this with the comedy aspect. I mean, I love things like The Office US, Superstore, Parks and Recreation, Schitt's Creek, and all of those 30-minute huge amounts of laugh, but also tears in it as well, the drama side of it. But there's nothing out there at the moment. It's grabbed my attention. So I thought, well, why not write my own? But it's interesting, the different styles of writing, from writing a book to writing a screenplay to writing TV. It's all very different. So that's what I like, as well as the challenge of learning that new way of writing.
Understood. I mean, what's becoming obvious is that it feels like you've trained yourself, or I don't know if it's natural or if you're cultivating this skill set that allows you to turn these challenging experiences into sources of inspiration and creativity. I think that speaks to your resilience that you've touched on as well. And going into or being prepared for those challenging situations with an understanding that off the back of it, you will be stronger, bigger, better, badder, more capable, and better equipped to be creative. What a brilliant tool and what an incredible weapon to be armed with. I just wonder, as we're recording this, very recently, the wonderful Matthew Perry passed away. I just wonder if TV show Friends, was that important in your young adolescent life at all?
Yeah, it was. We could all relate to at least one or more of the characters. I think we had a little bit of everybody in us. The OCD of Monica, the sort of snobbiness of Rachel, and then the goofiness of Ross, and Chandler, his quick wit was incredible. And the fact that he was beating these demons and yet able to give us what he did was such an amazing gift. And I don't think he really ever appreciated that. But I do also think that there is an element that often it's like Robin Williams, these comedic geniuses, they have these inner demons that they're forever beating. but yet they put that aside to give us something just absolutely incredible. So I think, Friends you can go back and watch it. It's timeless, I think. It will be forever encapsulated as one of the originals, I would have said, of the sitcoms. I know there were loads of them out there, and there are some brilliant ones. I think what was nice is it related to all age groups, all different people, certainly an inspiration for me. That writing, imagine being a staff writer on Friends. How amazing. You would just go home every day just wanting to be back at work the next day. Maybe that's just my romantic view of it, but that's how I think it must be. And thinking up these jokes and working with the actors would have been incredible.
No doubt. And so you're working on, are they the same thing? Situational comedy, mockumentary? Is that one project? And do you find yourself writing jokes, or are you crafting situations that feel awkward or familiar? And so therefore laughter is because of guilt or familiarity. What kind of humor are we talking about, and how do you collect and design humor in writing? There's a question.
It is a very good question, yes. One for the brain cells. A lot of it is situational. I, as I say, can turn quite a lot of things into a humorous situation, or I can laugh at myself or laugh at others. I'm great at laughing at others. But I also think that I'm really good at very quick dialogue, and I hope that's what is shown in the book and also in the screenplays that I have written. I hope that the dialogue is actually pretty quick, on the mark, because I think that's what the comedy is all about. It's that response in the moment to what's been said and not get lost. It's powerful enough that it doesn't get lost, but also that it's...
Do you like Aaron Sorkin, by the way?
I do know. I watched his masterclass. Yes, I did. Even as simple as, I guess, for me, is if I'm texting somebody, I think I'm really funny. I'm probably not, but I make myself laugh. And that's the main thing. No, I do think my dialogue is pretty good. But as I say, it's also situational, sort of dramedy in the moment as well.
Oh, that's lovely. And how are you educating yourself? Do you feel like it's important to continue learning? Do we ever reach the point where we've finished learning a thing? And also, where are you going to continue learning? Can you call anyone out that you feel is important? Where are you going to learn?
I learn every day, all day. I seek out things to read, but also I do watch a lot. I read scripts sometimes, books. I devour books. I love reading, but also I watch things. I think social media, although I'm not a great poster myself, I think that watching other people and how they interpret either their lives or what they're doing is very interesting as well. And of course, we are on a huge trajectory of learning about AI coming up, because of course that is going to change the landscape of not only writing, but also what we're going to be seeing on the screen. We have to, as writers and creators, have that in our everyday learning, whether we're immersing ourselves in it or not, just learning and not fearing it, using it rather than fearing it. We fear the unknown, we fear what we don't know. But if you educate yourself with it, then obviously it disempowers the fear. It just dissipates, and then we can use it to our advantage rather than it controlling us. Let's start using it in our creativity. I'm not saying you use it to write something 100%, a whole script, because that is what has kind of been frowned upon right now, as people writing it for whole scripts or books or whatever, because there's no real creativity in that whatsoever. But I think certainly using it as a tool, an extra tool, is a great thing. And so for me, education, every single day I educate myself on life, what's going on in life, what's going on in the world, what's going on in my friends, my family, everything. I think it's very important to keep educating yourself. It keeps your brain healthy as well.
Sure, totally agree with that. And that's actually a really lovely segue into your final point on the list, your fifth source of inspiration in your life, as written here. And of course, every day and everywhere I get inspired things and experiences, things you see and hear, and all of the everyday repertoire, which includes all of the inspiration and creativity all around you day by day. So that's obviously a very broad one. What can you tell me about that? Is it conscious? Are you aware of it when it's happening? Do you look for it? Is it something you reflect on and find later? Are there any obvious sequences or repetitious examples? What can you say tell me about this day-to-day experience of inspiration and
I
creativity?
think it just basically it's living in the moment, isn't it? And finding the magic in all the moments. Even on your daily commute where it's exactly the same thing and you go through your same old rituals. It's just about deciding to turn left that day and walk down a different street. And you never know what you're going to see. So it is sort of conscious in a way, but also when you really are deep in thought and you're not thinking about what's going on around you, there could be something that happens that suddenly you remember it at a later date because it's triggered by something else. And that can be huge amounts of inspiration. Every day, every moment, there's so much that we can learn from, as I said, but also to inspire us to be creative. I'm a true believer that creativity is in all of us. It's just whether you decide how to use it. And I don't think you've got to necessarily consciously go out there and paint or sing or do whatever, but just even curating things in your own life is creativity. When you're truly creative, you are just being your own raw, authentic self. And I think that's beautiful. I really do.
Me too. How do you collect that? Or do you? Do you just remember it? Do you write things down? You say you journal. Are there observations in there, little moments that you've seen? Are you collecting these little moments in any way?
That's a great question. And I find it really frustrating because I am a little bit like I do have shiny button syndrome, where if I get my phone out to record something, I get distracted by something that's actually on my phone. And then I go back to trying to remember what I was going to write down. Yeah, it can be a complete disaster. So most of the time now I just remember things. And then I'm quite lucky. I've got quite a good memory. So things will often, if I immerse myself or if I recreate my steps that I've taken, and I remember what's been said or happened. So I'm pretty lucky like that. I mean, I do journal things and I do write things down now and again, but mostly, yeah, it's just sort of I just memory.
For sure. And just thinking about this list as a whole, observing the observers, the gift of destiny from your mother, and having no fear, and celebrating the inner adventurer, and turning these little moments of challenging chaos into fulfilling sources of creativity and inspiration. What a wonderful perspective. Do you reward yourself for that? Do you celebrate that? Do you see that in yourself? Is it something that you're going to try and teach others or upload into other people? What do you think about this list as a whole and just your approach to retaining inspiration?
I've always naturally sort of guided and mentored people, but I wouldn't ever say I've done that consciously. People sort of see me and what I do. I'm a very almost defiant to my own individuality. I really do beat to my own drum. And one of the things that I really dislike is when I feel trapped or whether somebody tells me I can't do something. I mean, obviously I live within the laws and morality and things like that, but I don't think that anyone else should tell me how to live my life. I like myself to the point where I can say, you do you and I'll do me. And I think that's the rewarding side of all of this. My creativity allows me to then put that down on paper and inspire other people more than just on a one-to-one basis. And I think that's the beauty of being an artist, is that we get to spread and show a wider audience beauty and inspiration and brighten up their day, which is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I sound so upbeat and positive, and I want to say that my life is not always like that. I have my dark moments. Everybody can sort of just get in touch with their inner creator, and I think that'll help their lives enormously, and be proud of who you are, foibles and all. I think that's really important.
Bravo. And just quickly before we part ways, what are you working on now? What's burning brightly in your creativity right now? What are you sort of excited to get into again? What can you tell me about what you're working on? And can you give me any titles? I guess I'm just curious about what you're working on.
Yeah, sure. Well, I have so many things on the go at any one time. I really do. So I'm working on 2 more scripts, and I'm trying to write a book, although I haven't quite stuck to the daily count every day. So the 2 scripts that I'm writing, one's a rom-com and the other one is a drama, and one is called The One Again and the other one is called The Sting of a Billionaire. The irony of that title. But of course, always going over the scripts that are already completed, because of course, many rewrites for that. And so of course there's always a hitch, which is the adaptation of the book, and then another which which is called Run It Again. And then obviously the mockumentary. So I always am on the go with everything. And I think that's with the shiny object syndrome, as I jump from one thing to another and I go back again. So I guess I never get bored, but then it does take me a long time to finish something unless I'm up against a deadline.
Would you recommend that way of working, having so many projects on the go? And also, are you able to read in a similar way? Because I can only really read one thing at a time until it's finished, and then I'll start another thing and read that until it's finished. I would guess that you're reading multiple things, aren't you, as well?
I am, yes, I guess so, yes. I mean, I have different places for reading different things. I sort of get into that routine of, right, I'm on the tube, so I'm going to read this. I'm sitting at my desk and I've got 10 minutes, so I'll read that. Yeah, different places for reading different things. Whatever works for you, do it. There's no right or wrong at all with creativity. If anyone tries to give you rules, take them and throw it behind you. You know, rules shouldn't be near creativity, I don't think. And I'm also doing a blog as well. So just to throw that one in as well, yeah. So yeah, there's a lot going on, but it's just amazing. I love it. It gives me life. It gives me something to work on, work towards. And as I say, it challenges me as well.
Yeah, got it. Totally agree with the rules in creativity. I feel exactly the same way. I love the subjectivity and the variable perspectives and how everything is okay. So, really excited to see what you produce. I'm sure you'd be happy to share some of your work in the show notes. So listeners, have a look out for that. You can find Sophie's work in the show notes. But thank you so much for joining. It's a real pleasure to have you. We'd love to have you back. Maybe if you make progress on some of your projects, you'd be willing to share a bit more. We'd love to have you back at some point.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. And it's been an absolute pleasure. You've been a great host and really nice to chat to you. And I'm always happy to share my progress. It's probably just adding more projects rather than finishing anything. No, it's going to be all finished, of course, polished and finished.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much. Lovely to speak to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the MAKEthrough.studio podcast. It's been season 2 and it's been episode 4. Thank you so much to Sophie for coming on. Make sure you check out all of her work. Links in the show notes. And remember, you can download the MAKEthrough app now for Apple devices. It's available in the App Store. There will be an Android version coming very soon, so keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, go back and listen to all the other podcasts. We've had some really beautiful episodes, some brilliant, magnificent episodes for some really creative people in season 1 and season 2 as well. Working on season 3 right now, which is coming together nicely. I've learned an awful lot, as plenty can go wrong in the world of podcast creation. I'm only just learning the ropes of how wrong it can go. But if we've learned anything at all from this episode with Sophie, I just need to pull on my big girl pants and get on with it. Turn it into gold. All right, thanks for listening. Go well.